Let's switch directions and let's talk a little bit about the role of government in education. Um, so, Clearly, it's in the best interest of the government for citizens to be educated. But is it in the best interest of citizens for the government to be a monopoly provider of education? For example, the government controls today here in America, the government controls both the collection and distribution of funding for their own schools. And largely because of that funding model, about 90% of American children are in government schools, a very expensive free education. Would you like to comment?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting paradigm. You know, a school board is one of the most local entities that can raise taxes. You know, and budgeting was always a critical time during the year for us as we project. And of course, it's also one of the critical things that maintain boards composition and superintendent's contracts. You know, if there's a bone of contention, it's always over taxes.
Yeah.
And but it's you don't get that bone of contention. And we were lucky at Greencastle. We were producing a product that they were very soft on us about taxes. Now there were always people who disagreed, but that's a sign that you have a good program when a community will support you in that way without having a riot. Remember, I went through a taxpayer group kind of thing, and that was completely different. But we got to the point where I think we could have sold a referendum, you know, to build or something. But that's a symptom. But you're right, and you really have to. In my job, one of my jobs was to help educate the board to understand how schools work. Do you understand? When I graduated, an 18-year-old off the stage, the next year that 18-year-old could become my boss because that's all you had to be is 18.
Yeah.
Live in the community. And all board members tell me, what do they know about running a school? I mean, quite frankly, they don't know much about that. They all have agendas. Every one of them will have an agenda. That's one of the bad things about the government, is that everybody has a personal agenda. And one of the things one of my responsibilities was help to figure out what that agenda was, and then try to massage that agenda. It comes in all different shapes and sizes. But the issue is we spent purposeful time to train, as you would say, the government, the board, what schools did. We brought, every month we would have a program that we would march kids in front of the board and they would talk about what was going on, because they wouldn't have known otherwise unless they had a child in the program. It was amazing when you start educating them about what school really is. And school really is about one thing: kids. Mm-hmm. If your budget isn't reflecting that, then there's something wrong. It's about kids. It's not about your constituents. We had some board members that said, well, I said, what about the kid? We got to the kid. So government loses that perspective. And also most governments cheat. For instance, Pennsylvania is supposed to pay 100% of the costs for state government. It's supposed to pay 100% of the cost for education. Well, they don't. They have a funding formula. All about that from being in politics, and and they massage it. And bigger districts get this, urban districts get this, impoverished. They have all kinds of money that they spread out, and that is an issue. And then they don't take into consideration if you're a rural school or a suburban school or an urban school. They don't take into a lot of consideration the clientele you're working with. Now, if I have a population of special needs children, that's an expensive population. How do I do that? So the answer is, yeah, I agree. It's a funny system, but if you didn't base it on taxation of property, because property doesn't change from one year to the next. I understand why they did it, because your acreage in your school district doesn't change. Personal income goes up and down, of course, with the economy. So you have to have some system. But the issue I have is, why can't that money follow the child? And a lot of people disagree with me in that regard, but if I know in my school district, the cost of living and all the factors you would put in the formula, and the cost of educating a child is $7,000. Why doesn't that $7,000 go to wherever the child is at? The only thing that really smacked us real hard was that cyber charter law that was instituted, where basically parents could enroll them in a cyber charter school or cyber school, and whatever the bill was, we had to pay, and we had no input into what the quality of the program was. You know, they could be reading comic books and getting credit. I mean, we didn't know. We couldn't. There was no way we could prove it. And so that makes the playing, is my boss would have said, that makes the playing field uneven. If you could even out the playing field and say, okay, every one of you can choose, what would happen? This is my gut reaction. What would happen is our schools would get better.
Absolutely.
Because competition would force us to be better at what we did.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. So right now, with 500 and some school districts, 500 and whatever odd number in Pennsylvania, they're all different. They're all uniquely different and unique communities. But I think public school would thrive. But there's a lot of people who disagree with that. But I think it'd be worth a grand experiment to find out. But I would do away with that cyber charter stuff where, you know, you can go anywhere. Because what we saw, we were losing huge blocks of money and had to pay, but we had no involvement in the quality of the program. And I think if you're going to put money towards it, you should have involvement in determining whether it's good or not.
Yeah, so I think, you know, different places have different experiences there. I think your situation was kind of almost like it was a charter type program, a public charter. There are other places where literally the local school system has, you know, a virtual academy, so to speak. And so the students can study at home. They get sent a computer, and it's a curriculum put together by the local school system. And so then the school gets the funding, the system gets the funding for that. And so there's a lot of different
That's
models.
exactly what we did, Melvin. We created our own online program, and we had a person, that one of our teachers we put in charge of that went out and talked to parents and say, hey, we'll give you the same thing, and the teachers teaching it are state certified people. We will attest to, and they'll run the program, and your child can do this instead of that. And that's how we got around it. Or else you were looking at a loss of, you know, you could lose several $1 million really easily.
Yeah.
So I don't have the answer to it, but now, because I worked in the private sector, the faith-based schools, I mean, it would be so nice if even a portion of it they could take in and put into that, to have quality schools, if we're really concerned about the most important thing, the student.
Right. Exactly.
But if we're debating other stuff, you know, and which enters always into the picture, then, you know, it gets cloudy. But if we're looking at giving every child in America the best education that child and family wants, then that's what we should do.